there's some pretty good research that shows that with this focus on sleep quality has suffered. And the more that someone is focused on optimizing for sleep, the worse their sleep gets. Now, these studies look at large numbers, so it's on average. Some people probably benefit a lot from having a Whoop or an Oura Ring or a special mattress, whatever it is. But on average, a lot of people, their sleep deteriorates. And my hypothesis for why this happens is really quite simple. If you turn sleep into something that you need to perform and do well at, it's kind of like the whole opposite of sleep, right? Sleep is supposed to be about shutting down to rest, to recovery. You don't strive into sleep, you fall into sleep, like you fall asleep. And I think that a lot of these gadgets, or a lot of people, they turn sleep into just another thing to excel at, which of course then brings on all kinds of nerves about sleep. And as anyone who's ever had any bout of poor sleep knows, the more you think about if you're going to fall asleep or not, the less likely you are to fall asleep.
And then it's 4 a.m. and you're like, damn it, my alarm's going off.
And everyone's had that experience before a marathon, but same thing, right? Before a marathon, you're like, oh my gosh, like I've got to get sleep to set up my race. Yeah. And then you don't. And you can still run really well. The body can do fine on a night or two of poor sleep. But I think when you put on all these devices, if you like are the kind of person that really obsesses about it, then every night is kind of like that marathon feel, like I must sleep to get the right recovery score or whatever it is.
Totally. I think we can learn a lot from what's going on right over here with sleep.
Who's that?
That's Alfie. He's snoozing like a champ right now.
He's a better role model than my dog. My dog sleeps with like one eye open because he's a 2-year-old German Shepherd and just like must watch the front door for the mail person.
He had quite a day of exercise yesterday. He's almost 9 years old, and he loves hiking. He loves running, but he did a lot yesterday, and now he's exhausted, which is the principle of train, rest, repeat.
And I noticed he doesn't have 9 gadgets hooked up to his paws.
You can't see his paws. He's got an Apple Watch and a Fitbit on each one.
There you go.
Let's rewind quite a few years. What did young Brad want to be when he grew up?
Believe it or not, I wanted to be a writer. So I wrote for the school newspaper. Well, before that, I wanted to be a pro athlete. And in high school, I realized that I wasn't going to be a pro athlete. I was a good high school athlete, but it became very clear I wasn't going to be a pro athlete. And then I wanted to be a writer. So I wrote for the school newspaper. I was really involved with the school newspaper in undergraduate school. But I also, as the pragmatist in me, said, oh, you can't make a living as a writer, so I better go get a quote-unquote real job. I also, going back to high school, I applied to the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern, which is like the foremost prestigious journalism school in America. And I got rejected. And like those 17-year-olds, I said, all right, like, guess I'm not going to be a writer. I'll go to another school and study economics or psychology, whatever it is. And that's precisely what I did. So I always wanted to do it. And I had these false starts, or at least these moments where I'm like, oh, guess I'm not going to be a writer. Guess I'm not going to be a writer. But in hindsight, I was always writing. So as I mentioned, like even in these non-writing jobs, I was always the person that was doing the storytelling. I worked at McKinsey & Company for 2 years, and I was never the person running the financial model. I was always the person making the PowerPoint slides. So looking back, it's pretty cogent. Like, oh yeah, you told nonfiction stories, but that's only in the rearview mirror. At the time, I wasn't like, oh, I'm going to do this so I can learn how to write nonfiction. No, I was doing it because it's what I enjoyed doing and what I was decent at.
That makes sense. And fast forward a few years, and we've all learned a lot from your learnings. So, was Peak Performance your first book?
Yeah, that was the first book.
Where did the idea for that come from?
You know, it came from a lot of training in endurance sports, my own training, and seeing that so many of the principles that good endurance athletes follow actually make a lot of sense for just everyone to perform their best in whatever it is they do. Whether it's creative work like this, whether it's trying to manage a team, whether it's parenting, you name it. And looking into the research, it became really clear that actually these different academic silos called these concepts different things, but the actual concepts are the same. So whether it's like deliberate practice in music or periodization in sport or incubation in creativity, these different scholars that were talking to each other all had their own frameworks that were basically the same thing, which is you stress a system, you challenge it, you allow it to rest and recover, and then it grows. You have to have the optimal dose of stress and the optimal dose of rest. And it's constantly adaptive, moving target over time. And that was really the kernel that became Peak Performance. I co-authored it with Steve Magnus, who really has become a collaborative partner in just about everything that I do.
So what I love about your realizations from Peak Performance around, like, you have all of these different arenas where the same principles apply. I've found in my 10-ish years in working for companies that dabble or you're either very heavily involved in the endurance space to some capacity, that it's for this reason that endurance athletes tend to make really excellent employees, because they get the practice of the process and they get the practice of like brick by brick by brick. I've only ever worked at startups in my career, so this is slightly a jaded perspective or a slightly biased perspective, but my opinion on the matter is that this like trial and error, trial and failure, like repeatedly showing up when you don't feel your best, and then at some point experiencing growth or progress and breakthroughs, like you can teach that, but it has to be through like an actual life experience, which I find to be super cool.
Yeah, sport is a beautiful microcosm for life. One of the most popular essays I've ever written is called The Zen of Weightlifting. And it takes weightlifting and basically says that, hey, like there's a reason that people can find this piece in what from the outside looking in looks like a very intense sport, throwing heavy things around. And it's that process of showing up, of learning, especially as one gets pretty good at something, that to get 5% better might take a year or two. But that's okay, because that's totally to get 5% better on the scoreboard, but you're learning and you're growing and you're becoming so much more like wise as an athlete in that 2-year period. So yeah, you're not going to have me argue. I'm as a lifelong athlete, I think sport is just such a wonderful teacher. And it's why I'll have my kids in sports. If they choose eventually not to, obviously that's fine. But I think that it really is a good teacher.